One.
Sure.
We're alive! We did it! Hi, everybody.
Hi, everyone.
Welcome to Psycho Hey Ho. That's our.
I'm never gonna call it that, Trace.
That's our acronym for this.
It's too many syllables.
Psycho Hey Ho.
Mashed together.
It's just fun to
Is
say.
that easier than saying SciComm happy hour?
It's not.
Erin!
That's also the other reason.
Erin made it. Hello.
Wonder.
We
We're
literally
alive!
just went live. So.
We did it!
We could totally hear the echo in Erin's system, but it's okay. She's fixing it.
I got it. We're good. Hi. I'm so sorry about that, guys.
No,
you're
you're
here.
fine.
That's the
We're
important
live on
thing.
YouTube right now, so
Awesome.
FYI.
It was
how I
perfect
roll.
timing. We
Good.
got here
so-
just as we went live.
Welcome to
Awesome.
SciComm Happy Hour, our weekly excuse to talk to science communicators about life in these amazingly weird times.
And also, have
We're going to
beer.
chat a little bit about each other, how we're doing, how we're coping. And then we're going to talk a little bit about some science that we've all been experiencing too. So this is a celebratory time. So if you haven't gotten a drink out, now is the moment to go grab it.
Yeah.
And pull it together. So tonight, hi, I'm Kishore. And Trace is Brady Bunch in that way from me on my screen. And we've been doing this every week for, Trace, this is 8 weeks we've been doing this already.
That's
Can
right.
you believe that?
8 whole weeks. It's very exciting. I'm Trace, by the way. This is my channel that you're watching this on. And you can find me all over the internet at Trace Dominguez. I make science videos for myself. I also have a show called Stargazers on PBS, which is really fun. It's about naked eye astronomy. And then I also do all sorts of other things that are all nerdy stuff.
Awesome. Let's whip around and do some introductions. Miriam.
Hi, I'm Miriam. I am a climate researcher, but I also talk about climate change on YouTube at Zentoro. Also on Hot Mess. We're going to have a small little season coming up
Hot
soon.
Mess. Hot Mess is
Yay!
an amazing PBS YouTube channel.
It is pretty amazing.
Uh-oh, my computer just went haywire.
Oh no,
Uh,
Kishore!
Trace.
That's okay. Miriam,
Erin,
Miriam, tell us more about what your life is like, and then we'll move on to Erin as well.
What my life is like?
Yeah.
I hang out. I live in New York with this sleepy dog. And I stare at a computer all day long. So this is the same as
Par for the
normal.
course.
Let's see. What else is exciting about my life? I started a worm farm recently. So I check on those every
What?
day.
That's cool.
That's weird.
It's great. I like to have, I did the same, like everybody makes a sourdough starter. And then I thought, what would be another way to have millions of more pets in my house? So just getting all the weird ones.
I love that you're like, oh, all these people baking, let's next level that with some worms.
Yeah, but
That's
like
amazing.
baking and worms, both. That's
Yeah, it's
that's
not an
the joy.
either or situation, but I like the progression of thinking. Erin, you want to say hi?
Yes. I didn't change my Zoom background because I rushed in here right at the end, and so I'm living in Fraser's apartment right now.
It's very sunny.
That's perfect.
Normally, it is literally a green screen, so it is boring to not, you might as well have fun stuff behind it. But yeah, hi, I'm Erin. I am an astrophysicist. I did my PhD in gravitational waves and general relativity. From then, I left academia and I started teaching sort of science museums and at conventions. And now I work as a science consultant for Star Trek and work with other writers. And so, yeah, I live out here in LA. It's not quite as sunny as the fake Seattle scene behind me, but it's still pretty nice though. And my partner is currently making a drink for me since I had to rush up here. Make sure I wasn't late. My type A personality was in anger overdrive, so a drink must be had.
Nice.
Oh,
I managed to fix. Oh wow,
Double.
That's an
I love
amazing-
it.
That is an amazing flex.
Erin.
Getting drink delivery during the stream.
The timing of everything you've done today is perfect. You show up right when we go live. You mentioned getting a drink from your partner. It's like he was standing or they were standing right there.
You know.
Amazing.
That's amazing. Yeah, that kind of, everything is right with the world now, so.
Trace, I managed to fix it. We're also live on my Twitch channel now.
Cool.
And I got the dreaded "your drivers are out of date" like 3 minutes before going live. And then I decided while we were just having that introduction, I would just reinstall video graphics drivers to see how that goes. And, it worked. And so we're back.
Awesome. What's
the moral of the story is, fuck it, just do it.
I want to just start by asking. I know it's trite. I know we're way into this, but I usually just ask how people are doing, but I'm going to tweak the question a little bit this week and say, are you fatigued at all? This is the week it really punched me that I'm like, I need to go outside. I'm itchy. I'm feeling like the angst. And while normally I would have the kind of seeing scenes of protesters and people at beaches usually get me really anxious and angry to a certain extent. This week, I don't know, I had a lot more empathy to that idea of just wanting to go outside. Anyone else feeling that way? Are they at fatigue level, fatigue DEFCON level 11? No?
Trace looks like he is.
Yep, I've been inside for 40 some days. I've gone on walks, but I would like to go do something that isn't inside. Yeah. That would be nice.
See, my thing is I got sick last week, so that's been fun.
Oh no!
With bronchitis, so that's been even more fun to try to figure out what this was. So I do not have coronavirus, or at least my tests did not come back positive. But so it's just kind of been a roller coaster. But in terms of the long-term fatigue, I think for me, what I noticed is that this week when I've woken up in the morning, my brain goes, is this still happening? Is this still real? And that's that's been the most recent change for me mentally of just, oh man, reality.
Still happening, still real.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Miriam, how about you?
I think the very major fatigue maybe set in for me last week more. So the week before that, or I don't even know what time it was Earth Week. So I was very, I had a lot of things to do. So I was able to focus and be distracted the whole time. And then that ended. And suddenly I was just like, I don't want to be in here anymore. I'd like to go outside. I mean, I have to go outside and walk my dog every day, but I want to go for long runs, but doing that in a mask is not, doesn't work.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I don't mean it to be a downer. It just I've noticed how when I start to get fatigued, when that sort of emotional weight starts to rise, my willingness to keep listening to scientists and doctors and all of that starts to decline just a little bit. I'm not going along with their advice or anything else, but I can just see I'm starting to have those moments where I'm enough out of you, Dr. Fauci. And it's I should never have that feeling of not wanting to hear from Dr. Fauci. But I guess what I'm just trying to get at is I think there's a lot of incredibly dense emotional spectrum happening for a lot of people out there grappling with the uncertainty, and we're all not going to handle it in the same way, and just trying to be more understanding of that and at least acknowledging that, because just stay home, you can only say that so many times before it starts to wear down.
Yeah, and I think the struggle is when we all kind of were pushing that, and still are pushing to flatten the curve idea, we didn't really factor in it's a flat, long curve. It's, we're doing the right thing as much as we can. I mean, I live in LA, and LA's been pretty good, and we're not, nor Orange County, but don't ignore them, but they're protesting right now, and it's frustrating for me personally, but it's just it's the long haul. And I think someone posted something recently that I hadn't really thought of before. I haven't studied early 1900 history or anything, but how much the Spanish flu affected the society in the 1920s. Kind of was thinking a lot about.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting. I never thought about it from a societal perspective or like a social perspective. But like any kind of major world event is going to change. I feel like this is one that it was such a slow start that people were like, oh yeah, it's going to be fine. We're just going to move on and it'll be okay. And, you know, this will be like a few weeks and it'll be annoying. But this is going to be like, I don't want to get everybody down, but like years?
Yeah.
You know, like until we get vaccinations and herd immunities going, and like we're talking years of listening to people talk about this. So I totally feel sure, like I don't ever want to feel like stop talking to me, experts, but I also kind of want to be like, can we talk about something else? We all know that we're going to be inside. We don't need to hear the coronavirus update at 11:55 and then again at 11:58 and then again at 12:02. We don't need it. We need it at 11:55 and then tell me something else.
Did you pull like my data from when I opened Twitter at night? Because that was like on the minute activity for what I do. You're a little bit inside our phone. I agree, Trace. So why don't we talk about something else? Let's talk a little bit about science. How about that?
I love it.
Miriam, you're our guest this week, one of our guests this week. Do you want to lead us off? You want to take us into, we want to go from something that's like existential dread of COVID to something that's long-term existential dread, like by talking about climate. So I thought, you know, that'd be a good place, uplifting place to start.
I mean, that's like, it's funny, but also I'm in so many climate grief maybe groups where we basically talk about how it's very interesting that the sentiment that we have felt about climate change for so long is kind of everyone is feeling now about COVID. And how do you, have we learned any coping mechanisms for climate that we can use for COVID? I don't know that I'm necessarily any better off than other folks now, but let's see. Climate change is scary and real. Can I talk about Simon's video that he released
recently? Absolutely.
Is that interesting?
Yeah. I mean, who watched Game of Thrones in this hangout? Like, I did. Nobody else?
Yeah.
Oh.
Okay.
So.
Yeah.
Oh, you may watch it overall.
Yeah, like just watched it, because then we're all going to enjoy talking about it. Please, Miriam, tell everybody. Like,
yeah, I mean, like I only learned about this like 2 days ago when he put up the video. But Simon Clarke is a climate scientist turned YouTuber in the UK, and he interviewed a man that had taken the stuff that you can pull from the Game of Thrones book and put it into a climate model to try to figure out if they could replicate the climatic elements of Westeros. And apparently the whole planet is called Planetos. It's very cool. He has a whole video about it. And also
it is not called Planetos.
I think that's what it is called.
I think that already disqualifies George R.R. Martin from being a good writer if you name something Planetos. That's weird.
I mean, the main place is Westeros. Like, what do you expect?
Yeah.
I mean, Kishore, Plunets exist.
Oh, fair.
Plunets.
That's right.
And unobtainium.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
There are lots of weird.
Okay. You're just reinforcing we're bad at naming. But
not
Miriam,
that I want to defend Martin, but
I thought climate models, like, you need numbers. Are there actual like numbers in the books where he's like, it's this cold, or like some indication of how cold it was or how warm it was in places? I just don't remember that level of detail.
From the books, they're pulling things like autumn and the timing, but also they kind of orient where these places are on the planet. And to build a climate model, all you need to know is like the size of the planet, how far it is away from the sun, and then everything else is just normal physics that exist here or on any planet. It's why we can make climate models of like Venus and Mars and whatnot, because physics is the same no matter where you are in the universe.
Allegedly.
Yeah.
If you're talking about planet scale, yes. Yeah. Then it rapidly goes outside of my area of expertise. So yeah, like if you can be like this, if you know where the continents are, which like they roughly know, I mean, they make some assumptions because there's one continent. My knowledge of like the deep Game of Thrones lore is not as good as my knowledge of like climate modeling lore, but they make some assumptions about where some of the continents are, but turns out when they built it and put it through a climate model, the seasons that are in the climates that are described in the books aren't that far off from where these continents would be. And they did a little bit of funky stuff with the axial precession, how the Earth kind of wobbles on its axis as it travels, to make it more extreme, so they could get the long winters and long summers.
That's what I was going to ask, is like how that was the thing that always threw me off when I thought of the science of their climate, was how is it that they have irregular seasonality? It was also, if that is their whole continent, if they only have one, how big is their planet? Is their gravity relative to our planet different? Because that would make sense if you had a giant flying thing, you know, because that would be really hard in our gravity. But like if you have a lower gravity, it would be, I don't know, easier. I don't know.
I mean, I know the sort of flying from the time got all screwed up in the later seasons.
Yeah, in the show they really
I don't think this is as big as I think this is. yeah. But I'm curious what those other continent names are. If they're Easteros and Northeros, I'm gonna give up.
I want to go to Southteros. It's vacation time. The vacation continent.
But so he built an entire climate model taking all that into account. Like, what does it look like at the end of the day? Is it?
He also published it under the name Samuel Tarley, which is funny.
I love nerds. I'm just gonna drink to that.
You know what?
Nerds.
You know what? This is the first time I'm gonna push back against this. Like, you can't have a deep expert in like medical history, biological science, infectious diseases, and be a climate modeler. I feel like that's a little bit too much to ascribe to Samuel Tarley.
That's so funny.
But he's great.
Just spending a lot of times in the Citadel, you know, reading all the books.
Yeah, he's a really good reader. He's voracious.
That's amazing. But like, did he do this just to kind of explain how climate modeling actually works? Is that like the whole point of this?
Yeah, it's like I think it's like a climate communications conversation. Like, how do you take something that is more abstract, difficult, like basically really not, well, it's like, it's physics and it's a bunch of computer code. How do you make it something that people can get excited about and relate to? He also has one for Middle Earth and the climates there they published. I haven't read that one though, so I can't speak to it. But yeah, it's basically just like, how can we take something that and make it so people are interested in it? And I mean, honestly, it's such a good, it's way more interesting than like the way that I learned this stuff was like, imagine Earth is just a black sphere, now add an atmosphere, and all this other, like, that's how you do it if you're in a physics class about it. And this is like, what if, imagine Earth is this planet from a fictional universe you've spent so many hours in. And it's a really good tool for, like, I feel like I understand climate models a little bit better after this, honestly. And
that's amazing.
Play with them all the time. So
that's a really good reason to watch that video. Then.
Yeah, definitely.
Can I ask a question? Because the last month has been the month of anyone that has Excel can build their own model of stuff month. And I was wondering, as somebody that's been studying climate modeling, that thinks about climate modeling a lot, like, how do you look at the landscape of what's happening now when of how we're talking about like these epidemiology models? Like, is there something that we can learn from like how climate modeling has gone and how people have interpreted it that we should be thinking about now?
Ooh, that is a very good question. I mean, the interesting thing, like a lot of what I'm doing day to day is helping by reading all of the papers that are getting published rapidly about the relationship between meteorology and climate and the spread of COVID. And there are a lot of papers getting published really, really fast. And not all of them are very good. The thing, I mean, in the same way that a model is going to take the assumptions and biases that you feed it, and so knowing what those are is really important. I mean, I think the thing that I try to parse is that like a climate model is so big scale and mostly physics based, whereas these epidemiology models, we have to assume a lot of things that we don't really know. Like, no one super gets what the relationship between climate and spread is right now, or how to parse that really well from population density and travel and stuff. So, whew.
One of the things
honestly, at this point, I would just read less about it and wait a couple weeks before.
I agree with that. I mean, one of the things I've really been walking away with from hearing about people talk about modeling is not to look at modeling as predictive as much as it is tool for decision making. And I'm sure that's not, that's a kind of a glib, like very grand statement. But there's a lot of ways that I hear climate modelers talk about it in the same way. Like the models we're building aren't to set forth the idea that in 50 years, we're going to exactly have this amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and these are the effects. It's meant to be illustrative so that we can make public policy and, even individual decisions now. So in that way, they're not meant to be predictive. So it's like when they don't hit, we don't like on a sports channel, we'd be like, you were wrong about that game. Like, that's not what this is. This is really a tool for thinking. And that's not this like massive shift in your approach to it, but that subtle shift actually changed my whole perspective on like the IHME model coming out of University of Washington and whatnot, to not treat it as like those numbers are real. Those numbers just indicate decisions we have to make now. And so that like has taken the weight off the idea of scientists being predictors of anything. Because they're not Nostradamus, they're scientists.
Yeah, they're just using
the numbers
that we have now and using that data.
Yeah, I mean, and like the thing is that most of the time, if they're done well, they're not going to be that far off. Like there's uncertainty bars for a reason, but like, it's a little bit trickier. I mean, this is where I get like teasing between climate and epidemiology models. Like epidemiology models, you can change one variable and it's going to change a lot. But like historically speaking, climate models have not been that far off, or they've underestimated the danger that we're in. So it's kind of like a balance between like what, as you said, like what do we do knowing that this is a possibility? And from like a political standpoint, there's a lot to lose if you don't do anything, and not so much to lose if you do something. So
I think too, like not even from as someone who's not an epidemiologist or a climate scientist, I think at a fundamental level, though, humanity still struggles with the idea of like exponential curves. And
for sure.
And that's been the parallel that I've seen throughout all of this.
That is an accurate statement. A very accurate statement. Like that's one of those things where I love to see anytime somebody's like, oh, we asked people. Like we said, if the dots are here and it's exponential, where's it going to go? And people are always like, well, right there. And it's like, nope, it's going to be up here. And it's like, what? People have no idea.
Oh.
Yeah. It's hard even for us that have been like trained to think about exponential curves, because it's just like our day-to-day life doesn't exist that way. Like there's no other aspects of our life where things go exponentially greater outside of like dishes. Dishes are an exponential curve in my household, but outside of that, there's no other thing. And so it is really hard to grasp, even for the people that live that day to day.
Yeah, totally. I only like understand exponentials when I'm reading a paper about it. But then if I like turn back into normal human mode, I'm just like running into walls, not really understanding anything. So it's hard.
Well, that's everyone should go check out that video that Simon put out on Samuel Tarley's calculation of the climate of Westeros.
So
Trace, do you want to plop that into the YouTube chat as well?
Oh, I did it.
Already done?
I did it already.
Done. Way
Thanks,
ahead.
Kishore. That's
totally.
awesome.
Quick, so fast.
Yeah, it's in there. Please, add it to your watch later and watch it after the stream.
Yeah.
I want to go back to a time before all of this. Like a year ago this week, it was one of the happiest weeks of my life.
I know exactly what you're doing, and I love it.
You might notice there is a fair amount of ephemera in this house, in my household.
That transition.
It was such a good segue, Kishore.
So
Brilliant.
A year ago, Avengers Endgame came out. I was probably the only one in my theater as a huge Thanos fan that was rooting for him.
I would like to raise my hand after you're done with this explanation so I can tell the story of being in the same theater as Kishore and not knowing where he was.
Well, all I'm saying is that Avengers Endgame came out a year ago, and so I wanted to use this opportunity to talk a little bit about the science of it. But yes, Trace, you might as well tell how crazily obsessed I am with this.
Kishore loves Thanos a lot. Like, he had a Thanos action figure with him that he took pictures of on, like, we were at the Alamo in San Francisco. And
wait, do I have 2 Infinity Gauntlets? Did you say? Yes, I do.
Yeah,
I have 2 different ones.
And he was the only person definitely in the audience in, not Endgame, but in Infinity War, rooting for Thanos. So at the end of Infinity War, I'm just going to go say this, spoilers, although this movie is now years old, so that doesn't apply. But, like, after the movie ended, and it's all, like, you know, strings, cut to black, we're all in a quiet theater. Almost everyone in the theater is emotionally wrecked, and Kishore goes, "Woo!" Like, he's just so excited.
So to defend myself, I grew up in the 90s, and I grew up reading the Infinity Gauntlet comics. Like, I have like some of the compendiums back here. I have all these signed things. I have drawings from Thanos up here that Ron Lim did and Jim Starlin did. This is a Thanos action figure that I bought in 1994 in Santa Cruz. He's been to 4 continents with me, and so he's like my traveling companion. And the reason I gravitated to this character, who, let's be real, is a nihilist and is weird, is because I remember the first comic book villain I came across that was a little bit, like, a touch more complicated. That wasn't just like, I'm a villain. Like, he had some, like, differing motivations. I don't want to get into dissecting that, because that argument I just made really falls apart when you bring up the particulars of his comic arc. But let's just leave it where it is right now and celebrate the fact that Endgame, which was a fantastic film by my account, came out a year ago, but it boggled the time travel mind, especially when, you know, there's a moment when they were like, Back to the Future, that is not how time travel works in this universe.
I loved that they threw some other time travel stories under the bus.
So good.
It was so funny and just so, like, referencing the world that they inhabited almost. Yeah. Like, it made them feel like they were in the same world as us.
I love when they were like, hot tub time machine. Yeah, hot tub time machine.
But the reason we're bringing this up is because Erin was like, I would like to talk about time travel in Avengers Endgame. And, like, and we were like, deal. So, Erin.
Oh. Yeah, and we have segued to this incredibly smoothly, which I have mad respect. But also kind of what Miriam was talking about this Game of Thrones idea. Like, this is what I and I think a lot of us have used, in fact, definitely everyone here on this chat. The ability and the power of using pop culture to teach science is unbelievable. And I think science is so hard for people because they don't have a reference point to it, that if you can say, oh, that exoplanet, that's like Tatooine because it has 2 suns. And then people will be like, yeah, there's no science in Star Wars. But your class will, you know, start asking questions of like, well, so there could be, and what would that planet be like? And the type of questions that you want budding scientists to ask. So I've been doing this science of science fiction for a long time, and that's how Kishore and I met, using sci-fi to teach science. And so I have a channel, my Twitch and YouTube, and it's Dr. Erin Mac on Twitch. And every week I do an episode club where we break down the science behind science fiction episodes or movies. And because of the anniversary of Endgame, my patrons and everyone voted for Endgame, and I spent a full day. I got up at 8 in the morning and I was like, all right, I'm watching Endgame. And I took copious notes and tried to figure out if we
Tell me you have the graph with you.
Yes, it's right here. I'll be right back.
Oh man. This is some suspense, you guys.
Okay, so there is a graphic.
I have more Thanos ephemera that's joining the chat now.
I might have to screen share this. But there's a whole graphic of me tracing the Infinity Stones.
Ooh.
It's not zooming in. I might share my screen. I did convert this to an image. I'm currently making, because I'm pretty proud of it. And I basically traced the path of every single Infinity Stone and which characters grabbed them and which, because as someone now, I do with general relativity and my background in that and space-time, a lot of science behind time travel and multiverse theory and all of these. And so all of these, you know, how time travel works comes into it. But the key with Avengers Endgame is when they're having that brilliant discussion about time travel and Bruce Banner's like, none of you get this. It's not true. Hot Tub Time Machine sucks. Because is this idea that your personal timeline, you continue to age. Wherever you drop in the timeline, even if it's the past, it is now your future. And that's really the key to Endgame. The one part that I still have to wrap my brain around, and I think we all kind of struggled with, because they closed the loop brilliantly, right? Like Captain America goes and he drops back the stones where they were supposed to be so the timeline could continue, so it wasn't fractured. But this idea that them going back in time caused Thanos and Gamora and Nebula to know that they were time traveling and then branch their timeline and came to the future and then got killed in that. Spoiler alert. But got cool. Killed in that. Like, it does close, just in the sense of the yeah, brilliant. In the sense that if you go back to how Bruce Banner talked about time travel, it's fine. Like that, I feel like the writers very consciously wrote that dialogue to say this is his time. Thanos' timeline still happened, even though there was a duplicate branch that happened. Yeah, I thoroughly appreciate that.
I believe there was 3 or 4 physicists that were consulting on this work. Is that right?
I think so, yeah.
I think Clifford Johnson from USC is one of them that was working on it. There was like 3 or 4, like Spiros, I think, was working on it too. So like a lot of scientists that work with Hollywood writers were tasked with this, I think, helping them keep this consistent.
And it's tight. I mean, because for me, I was very consciously like, I don't want to look up any timelines. I don't want to look up what anyone else has done. Like, I just want to take the source material and see if I can break this down and see if it closes. And it does. I mean, it's impressive. And this whole idea of Gamora being able to survive, but it's because this Gamora branched and everyone else died, but she walked away from it. Mm-hmm. Her time, there's 2 Gamoras, but we had in those time travels when they went back to them, you know, we had 2 of them existing at one time. And at one point we have 3 Captain Americas, if you think about it.
That's a lot of America's ass right there.
That is a lot of America's ass wandering around. One slightly more middle-aged than the rest of them, but you know, power on.
Slightly more. You've got that super serum. That applies. I think that applies.
You're not wrong. Yeah.
I would take it. So I have questions. I have lots of questions, as you might imagine.
I wish I had known how deep your love for this, because we've known each other for like 5 years, but have never had this conversation. You would have been on my chat this week.
I'm so deep into this.
Miriam and I'll just sit here. You guys can have a great time. I mean, that's fine.
This is great. I wish I had popcorn.
This is like exactly what I would do at the bar. Is just be like, cool.
If I wasn't in my office, I would bring out a few of the charts that I did myself. Awesome. So like, you know, like
we can compare charts.
So the one thing I haven't been able to understand is, so like the basic premise here is there is a timeline for each of these segments, and that timeline is anchored by these 6 stones. They like help maintain the fidelity of that timeline. That's what the Ancient One tells us. So then a moment when somebody travels to a different time, you've created a fracture, as you said, and there's a totally different timeline. This is not so inconsistent with like the many worlds hypothesis of quantum mechanics that, you know, I don't want to say it's popular, but it's out there as a thing. So when does that branch happen? Does it happen as soon as they go, or when they arrive? Like that's and when is even a strange way to frame this, is like, what is the moment that actually causes the fracture? Was always a question that I was trying to test. and I feel like there's a couple places where that's not fully consistent.
That's fair, because I think the way it's presented is once you've reached a point of no return, that's where that fracture happens, right? Because that's how they convinced the Ancient One to let it happen, right? Because they were basically like, you got to bring it back, because if you take this away and you never come back, then we've irreparably fractured the timeline. And, we talked a little bit too about the fact that you can bring in chaos theory and nonlinear dynamics, that if you change a little thing, your starting conditions are changed just enough that for the lifetime of a human, it's probably not going to be noticeable. But over the course of generations or years, yeah, you might have created a different timeline. So how much do you care about that?
So my follow-up then, sorry, Trace and Miriam are also still here, but we're going through this.
I have questions, but Kishore is just like, so I'm not gonna. Why would I stop?
So there is the scene where they test the time travel, where Hawkeye goes back. Right. Does that create a branched timeline or not?
Is this is the one where he brings back the glove?
Yes.
Yeah. So we debate this a little bit. Did he create a branched timeline from there? And you can approach this two ways. One, from a physics perspective, yeah, with the quantum many worlds theory, that's a new timeline, because in this timeline now, the glove doesn't exist. But its starting conditions are so imperceptibly small from the original timeline, it doesn't really matter.
Like the likelihood of his daughter turning into like a supervillain that impacts the rest of the world because her baseball glove went missing is pretty low. Yeah, fair.
Right. And I use the analogy that my, incongruous stuff goes missing all the time, and I just write it off. It doesn't change my daily decision making. I'm not like, oh, that suck.
Yeah,
I
that's
shall kill
what
the
I
world.
When I thought of that timeline, I was like, that's one of those things where you lose your keys. Who's to say that they didn't disappear into a separate timeline, right? Like, who's to say? Like, that maybe that timeline was actually maintained because he went and he took a glove that would have been missing anyway, right?
Right.
And also,
this is where
I have a question that I think this makes sense with. And because you're asking about linear time as perceived by us in our universe, does it matter? Like, doesn't this all technically happen at the same time, because time isn't really relevant in that way? Like, our experience of time isn't really relevant to these laws?
Kind of. I think where you're going with that is this idea that when you travel through time, you've spawned a new timeline, and now the old one doesn't matter anymore. Right. And it continues to exist without you. And that's kind of like not to completely derail the conversation, but the analogy to this is the Star Trek reboot in 2009, right? Mm-hmm. That they basically were like, Spock and Nero went back in time through a black hole, and a new timeline spawned that doesn't affect any of the events that happened otherwise. And that's kind of the same thing. So it kind of works. Like I said, it breaks down a little bit right when you look at that era where Thanos learns that they're time traveling, and then he chooses to time travel out of his own timeline himself. Mm-hmm. That's the hardest part to wrap your brain around.
So when he leaves his timeline, the Earth of that timeline never experienced the things that would have been in Earth's future at that point that he left it. He never shows up. However, Infinity War happened in their timeline already. Yeah. And so therefore that Earth still experienced it. Because I think that's where people break down, is that like it's not one timeline. He's essentially changing lanes. So he went from one lane to another lane, but those lanes are in different places in time.
Hey, hang on, pause. We have a rule here that anytime a dog enters the chat, that we have to introduce the dog.
Hi, doggy.
This is
Who
Darcy.
Is the dog?
Darcy.
This is Darcy. She's very, very shaggy because, like me, she can't get a haircut. And she was sitting there staring at me because it's her dinner time, but she's not getting dinner quite
okay.
yet.
We'll wrap up soon for you, Darcy. Yeah, we're not going to let
She'll
you go.
She'll be okay. She's fine now. She's getting pets.
Sorry, please continue. And I have one wrap-up question on this before we go.
Well, but Trace, like exactly what you were saying, that's why that dialogue from Bruce Banner is so important, because if you we're telling the story of the Avengers, and what happened. We're not telling. Sorry, Kishore, we're not telling Thanos' story. And so
that was Infinity War. That was his story.
Right. And
he got a whole movie.
Because this branch happened, that happened in their future, their timelines all close, and that was the important point about returning the stones, so their past stayed preserved.
Right.
All from the perspective of the Avengers. It works.
So the reason I have been asking these questions, and Trace's questions lead to this too, is the debate that I think is going on is Captain America is a good person. That's why he can wield Mjolnir. He's worthy. But at the end of the movie, he goes back and claims that dance with Peggy Carter, and we're made to think that they lived a life together.
Oh, I know.
Which would potentially wreck the life that she created with another man and family that she had, as alluded to in their conversation in previous films. And so I think the debate about the time travel is how the consistency, if we're applying this consistency, what happened there at the end. And I think there's question marks there. It doesn't line up perfectly for you. I think that's the place where it breaks down just a little bit. But it breaks down in this way that's a little bit of a mystery, because they just don't tell us certain details we need.
And if you think about this idea that you spawn a different timeline every time you time travel, and you close it as much as you can, but if, Captain America going back and changing Peggy Carter's life, then that's now Peggy Carter Prime. That's a new one. And she's existed in both timelines simultaneously. So,
that's how I feel about it too. Time travel.
This is
I consider this a win.
For drinking. I'm just gonna say that.
I consider this a victory. Good. This is absolute win right here.
I'm so glad. I'm glad I didn't know that your passion for this ran as deep as it does, because I would have been very stressed out on Tuesday when I presented all of this.
So Erin did a stream about this, and I was in the chat, and I was just furiously typing questions the whole time. But I was being, mostly respectful and trying to queue up some jokes too.
Yeah, no, it was fabulous. I was glad you were there. So we'll have to do a follow-up with you, President.
I've written my own talk. I think I'll let you know when I give it somewhere online.
Sounds good. Awesome.
Trace, do you want to go, or do you want?
You can go. I want to know more about Spinosaurus, because I didn't actually look at Spinosaurus.
Okay, here we go. Let's time travel to 1944. So there was a German scientist, Ernst Bromer is his name, and he's a German scientist that was going on expeditions to Africa to collect a number of fossils, and he brought it back to Munich to a museum. He brought back what is mostly considered, probably not historically, but one of the more influential bones of a 100-million-year-old dinosaur called the Spinosaur. And the Spinosaur is interesting because it lived on land and water, and we don't have many dinosaur species that existed in the water. And this was a big creature, and he had found a bone. But in 1944, during World War II, the Allies bombed the museum where his collection was, and all of those records were destroyed. And so paleontologists have been talking long about the Spinosaur because it's this amazing thing. There's a dinosaur that swims out there, excuse me, that we don't know much about. And so for a long time, paleontologists have been trying to understand more and more. And even if you look back just a few years, you'll see stories from paleontology writers that will talk about how bad a swimmer Spinosaur was based on the information we had. Enter Nizar Ibrahim. He's a paleontologist at the University of Detroit. And he was in Morocco about 10 years ago, 2008. And he met a collector who had a Spinosaur bone. And he looked at it and he was like, this is pretty cool. And a few months later, he was at a museum in Italy, and he saw another Spinosaur bone in their collection. He's like, I think this is part of the same skeleton of the Spinosaur bone that collector showed me. And how is that possible? because I'm in very different locations right now. And so he goes back to Morocco and tracks down the collector, and he goes like, where did you get this bone? And like, how did it get to Italy? He turns out the collector had been selling a bunch of Spinosaur bones to collection sites around the world, including that one to Italy. And so he's like, where are you getting these bones? Like, you got to tell me what your source is. You got to give me a hookup. I need a Spinosaur bone. And it turns out like there's this area in Morocco called the Kem Dens that he had been pulling these bones from. And so Ibrahim conducts essentially what amounts to like an 8-year dig at the site, where they excavate like 15 tons of rock. And now they've recreated the largest skeleton of the Spinosaur ever created. It's about 80% of its total fossil mass. And a paper came out Wednesday showing this. And because they can model based off of the skeletal structure, what the biology would have looked like, they know that the tail doesn't look like what we've thought, which would have like implied that it was a bad swimmer. It actually had much more of a paddle for a tail. And so it could have moved 80% more water than initially thought, meaning that it was likely a pretty good swimmer and spent a good amount of time in the water, is what the early indications are. I love this story because it's this like Indiana Jones layer to the story and this amazing find that like upends our thoughts of how dinosaurs existed in the water 100 million years ago. And it's important to note, like 100 million years ago is pretty close to the KT extinction event. So this is like really late in the dinosaurs like time period. So it's not like crazy from like a very high level that we'd see dinosaurs have an evolutionary pattern where they would exist both on land and water. But to have like a really adept swimmer, which likely means if they were that adept at swimming, they probably hunted in water, which like evokes like more alligator type behavior. Very interesting. Really good paper to read too.
Oh, that was so stressful, Kishore. I thought that you were like this close to saying that the Spinosaur was fake and never existed, and about to shatter my entire reality.
Storytelling.
That was brilliant. So I love dinosaurs so much. I took all the prerequisites. I took more biology than I really needed to, nor should have, because it wasn't my forte, just so I could take a specific dinosaur class in college, and I still have the textbook. It was so worth it. I freaking love dinosaurs. That's a good story.
That's super
Dinosaurs
cool.
are the best.
I also love all of the stories around finding dinosaurs and like the histories of piecing together literally these ancient animals and what it can really mean for our understanding. So cool. So what you're telling me though is that the Spinosaur has a beaver tail? It's a giant beaver dinosaur?
It's so much longer. Like you have to imagine the Spinosaur was longer as a dinosaur than the T-Rex. So this is a massive creature. And so when I say a paddle, it's like really big. And given how like the size of it, I'm trying to like animate it over here. Given the size of it, it probably didn't have the speed of paddle of a beaver, but it definitely had that like kind of look and feel.
That's
so we'll
cool.
go with beaver. Sure.
Beaversaur. Love it. We're wrapping up pretty soon, but I wanted to talk really briefly about skin hunger, which I imagine we're all feeling right now.
Those are two words that don't go together.
You think so? So when
it's
was
a terrifying
the
name.
in your case, Kishore, you're with your family, and Erin, you have your partner there. Miriam, do you live with anyone? When was the last time you hugged someone? I don't know if you're a hugger, but
I'm not
says
really
93.
a
I'm
hugger.
gonna be like, you're my hero.
yeah. When was the last time you shook someone's hand or like high-fived or, that wasn't Darcy?
My girlfriend is also in the city and I have access to a car right now. So I saw her like 3 weeks ago, probably.
That's a long time ago. So
yes.
Skin hunger is the idea that you haven't touched or been touched by another human being in a while. So I was talking to a friend of mine recently about this because he said he hasn't touched another human since March 8th, which is coming up on 2 months. And I feel so sad for him I like want to go give him a hug, but I know I can't because he lives in San Francisco and I don't. I live in LA. But at the same time, I feel for him. So I'm putting together a series of videos about kind of the physicality of human touch that are going to come out on the channel next, not this coming Monday, but I think the following, maybe Friday. It depends on how quick I can get them together. But like skin hunger is a feeling that you get when you haven't been touched recently or haven't touched anyone in a while. And so we've all sort of experienced this idea where it's like, I really want a hug, or like, I really want that like tactile contact. And if you haven't had it, that is called skin hunger, which I think is really neat. It started getting researched in the early 20th century, around the time of World War II, because there was a lot more orphans and they were worried about people not having enough human contact and what that might do to their psyches, because it has a lot of impact on that. There are studies after the fall of communism in Romania. Similarly, they had a lot of orphans and there weren't enough people like cradling the babies that had been born, and because of that, those babies then were studied and they grew up and had a number of different issues related to behavior and aggression, and they've done studies with American teens and Parisian teens, or French teens really, because France has higher levels of human like tactile interaction. They touch each other more in France than Americans do. Americans are pretty hands-off. So they studied like different teenage groups. It's been really interesting to read a lot about it. But skin hunger really stood out as like a strange term. But I think one that we can kind of
I'm going to vote for name change. I'm going to vote for name change.
Yeah, that needs a rebranding super hard.
Touch
Sounds like a horror movie.
It's also thought of as touch deprivation, which I think is a little more clinical. But skin hunger just sounds like a metal band a little bit, like "We are skin hunger."
Skin hunger.
I would go see a band named Skin Hunger. I would go watch it. That'd be really cool.
Hell yeah! I'd sign up for that super fast.
I'm 20 years too old for that show.
I'm all about the rage death metal, so bring it on.
Trace, is there a difference between like human and animal touch?
There is and there isn't. Like they say that the research doesn't really play out as saying like, here is the exact difference between this and this. But what they do say is if you are feeling skin hungry, touching an animal is definitely going to help you more like kind of play that off for the future. Eventually though, you will need human contact. There's something different about it, I imagine, in our brains. But they do say that like if you can't touch another person because of how we're doing right now, staying inside and avoiding people we haven't had contact with prior, a good kind of tactile replacement is touching things that have different textures. So like different blankets, your couch cloth, the textures of your apartments and your living spaces, books, things that have varying textures will help keep your senses a little better. Think of it like if you sit in front of a computer all day and you're staring 24 inches in front of you, your eye doctor is going to say, look away from the computer, look over there, look up here, look down there, like move your eyes around. We don't really think of the touch sense in that way. We tend to think of touch as just like this thing that happens, but all of the other 5 senses we think of as like you have to train them and make sure that they're good. Like you have to train your hearing, you have to train your eyesight, you have to like fix it and augment it, and like touch is sort of overlooked. And a lot of this research, they were writing that like touch is one of the most understudied senses, and that it's like the final frontier of kind of sensological research. It was really neat. Interesting. And Michael,
really interesting.
Michael, I think maybe Michelle, I'm not sure how to pronounce Michal Frank in the chat, says that a hug needs to be longer than 30 seconds to have an effect. And that's true. It's actually 20 seconds or more. So when you do finally get to hug someone, give them a real hug. 20 seconds. That's when you'll start to actually get like a hormone release.
So whatever song you sing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the same as a hand washing. Just sing happy birthday. Just hug somebody and like quietly sing happy birthday to them.
See, I do the space, the final frontier. These are the voyages.
Very on brand.
Nice.
Very on brand.
I do killing in the name of. I do killing in the name of, because it's killing in the name of hygiene with the hand washing.
I like it.
Wow.
Let's do some quick plugs. Where can people find you? Miriam.
You can find me anywhere or almost anywhere on the internet at Santoro or Hot Mess, which is easier to spell.
Nice,
and
Erin?
Hot Mess is an amazing climate communication video series that Miriam works on. So check it out. Erin, how about you?
I can be found almost anywhere as at Dr. Erin Mac, DrErinMac, and my YouTube is Dr. Erin Explains the Universe. If you search for that, yeah, thank you for having me. This has been super.
And
fun.
Erin's on Twitch, I think 4 times a week, talking about science and science fiction and all sorts of fun stuff.
Yep, different themes. We'll do the next one coming up is my Star Trek brunch on Sunday mornings, where we just talk about Star Trek episodes.
Oh, love
with
it.
no science, no nothing, just in our robes with a cup of coffee, and yeah, it's awesome.
Done and done.
Yeah.
Trace, where can
so
people find Trace? Where can people find you?
You can find me right here on this channel. If you haven't subscribed, go ahead and smash that. Is it the like button? What do you smash? You smash the subscribe button. Whatever it is, just click it. It's nice. It's a nice click. It makes a nice, satisfying sound. So do that, and you can find new videos from this channel at least weekly for what we're doing now. We do this every Friday, and then looking forward to releasing that Human Touch episode. I might have a really exciting guest. I can't tell you who it is yet because it hasn't happened, but oh man, think about somebody who didn't touch other people for a long time, and let your imagination run wild.
I have guesses.
And I feel like you
Me
might be able to
too.
figure it out, but we'll see. Okay, so with that, thanks everyone for tuning in.
And I'm Kishore. You can find me on Twitter at
yeah.
Science Quiche, and I stream on Twitch a few nights a week at Kishore Hari. Wednesday nights we do a watch along of movies and talk about the science afterwards.
Oh, I'm sorry,
as a
Kishore, I
benefit
didn't
for
mean to
people that work
cut you
at the Alamo Draft House.
Awesome.
So thanks for tuning in, everybody. We really appreciate it. We'll